This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And I must say, for anyone that says I don't like Hulk Hogan, I do like him. I find him entertaining. He does bend the truth a lot, but the fact of the matter is I had zero interest. I didn't even watch the highlights of Bash in Berlin. It bored. Like, there's nothing. It was so predictable. There was nothing that made me want to watch that in the least. Didn't watch Raw Monday. Haven't watched anything from AEW past the Sting Wembley Stadium thing. I heard about this Hulk Hogan interview on Impulsive, Logan Paul's podcast, and I watched it pretty much in one day. And by the way, it's a great deal that they have with Logan Paul, one of the most popular podcasts on YouTube, to sign him. By having WWE continuously on the show, he reaches an audience outside of WWE and makes WWE seem cool. And Hulk Hogan did reveal in this he just signed a 5-year deal with WWE, so don't expect him in AEW anytime soon. He signed a 5-year deal at 71, so he'll be with them till he's 76. Lots of funny things in here. Here's what. First of all, I know Kevin Sullivan has lied about some things myself. I'll be honest. As much as he has good parts, he does lie about certain things. Kevin Sullivan's told this story many. And by the way, I don't think Hogan ever commented on Kevin's death, so I don't know if there's heat between them or not. But Kevin has told this story over and over and over again, that Hogan spent the night at Kevin Sullivan's house because Eric Bischoff was worried that he might not show up for Bash at the Beach, the night of Bash at the Beach. Not only did Hulk Hogan deny that anyone but him and Bischoff knew, he said that Hall and Nash didn't even know he was coming out. And it's funny because the internet was still in its infancy then. I remember in the Ottawa Sun had a wrestling column. The day before, even in Ottawa, Canada, there was a story that Hogan was going to turn heel at Bash at the Beach. So he's trying to tell me that nobody at WCW knew, including Kevin Sullivan, the booker. So what he's basically saying, he said he stayed at a hotel, and Eric had Sting ready to go in case he chickened out. He may have had Sting as a backup. That is true. But Hogan right here denying that he stayed at Kevin Sullivan's house the night before. And in fact, he says Kevin didn't even know Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had no idea and was as surprised as anyone when he walked out as the third guy. So that one's funny. He says he's bringing America back together one beer at a time. He's on this promoting his beer and promoting WWE. He claims he only wanted to go public about supporting Donald Trump after Donald Trump got shot at. So keep in mind, he appeared at the convention a couple days after Trump was shot. So I guess, according to him, it was last minute, as in a couple days before, according to that. Because he said he wasn't willing to go public, that he supported Trump before he got shot. So take that for what it's worth. He said in this, I'll agree with him on this, both Logan Paul and him went off about Bret Hart being bitter and hating everyone and how that takes away from his legacy. Keep in mind, guys, and I will say this just one more time, Bret Hart got a Lloyd's of London settlement for the Goldberg thing. And he went on to make millions and millions of dollars after with WWE. Was U.S. champion, fought Vince McMahon in the main event, was commissioner. I think he's still affiliated with WWE today. And he made a fortune in WCW. So, yeah, I can understand why they're sick of Bret Hart's being bitter. Here's a funny one. He said he wanted to go around for have a 2-year feud with Austin after WCW and have Steve Austin beat him every night. Now, Dave Meltzer even confirmed recently it was Austin that didn't want to work with Hulk Hogan. That's why it was brought up Hogan against The Rock instead, which ended up being one of the greatest matches of all time. One thing I did not know, though, until that Dave Meltzer interview that was posted on this channel about a week ago, they had a second match. Nobody remembers the second match that Rock and Austin had. But there was apparently a second match that was not quite as memorable. And for whatever reason, I didn't even feel like going to look that up afterwards. Here's an interesting one. He said Paul Orndorff never wanted to put anyone over. And that one is interesting because I know Paul Orndorff put over Bill Anderson, who was an enhancement guy for WWE and was a ring announcer in Phoenix and referee. He kind of was a jack of all trades. Paul Orndorff put over Bill Anderson in Phoenix because it was Anderson's full hometown. So he put over. Bill's not going to be offended by me saying it. He's very talented, and I'm friends with him. But he put over a jobber in Phoenix. So I don't know if I believe this whole Paul Orndorff never wanted to put anyone over. I never ever heard anything about that. I heard Piper never wanted to put anyone over. But this interview was the first I've ever heard that Paul Orndorff didn't like putting people over. Now, he did say in the book that in his original book, that he would sweat through about 25 title belts a month because he sweated so much. He toned it down a bit for this interview to a more believable level. He sweated through a belt every 3 or 4 weeks. He'd sweat through the leather, and he would give the belts away in exchange for stuff. He claimed, and I wrote this down so I don't get it wrong, he claimed he got 10 Harley Davidsons for one belt at one time. He also claimed that he bought John Wayne's limo, which I could see that being possible, but why have we never seen a picture of Hulk Hogan and John Wayne's limo? Like, we've seen Lawler bought the Batmobile, and there's pictures of that all over the internet. Why after all this time are we just hearing now that Hulk Hogan bought John Wayne's limo? I'd love for you to post a picture of this, Hulk. I mean, it makes for a great story. He said he never used his creative control. Never, ever used his creative control. He said that things in the WWE are leaked now. Logan Paul said that there's a mole in WWE creative leaking information. I believe that's true. Someone is leaking information. That's 100% true. Apparently, that's why Brooklyn Brawler got released after his long tenure with WWE. He was one of the quote-unquote moles in the office. And yeah, I do agree with Hulk Hogan that less was leaked back when Hogan was. I mean, this is what led to Hulk Hogan saying no one knew he was going to be the third guy in the NWO. Everybody knew. Maybe some didn't believe until he actually dropped that leg. But there was less. The word didn't get out as much in the past because there wasn't like 40 people on creative teams. There's only 3 or 4 guys. Apparently, by the way, Terry Taylor was one of the TNA leaks as well. So who knows? Terry Taylor's backstage in WWE. A well-known stooge in the wrestling business. Could be a stooge for someone like Dave Meltzer as well. He told the broken leg story again. The only difference this time is he said after Hiro Masuda broke his leg, his dad beat him up when he got home. That's the first time I've ever heard him say his dad beat him up after. There's a lot of people saying now that he didn't actually break his leg. That just made for the whole Hulk Hogan. It sounds like a good story. He broke his leg, then he came back. So take that or leave it. I never heard of Hiro Masuda breaking anyone else's leg. I've heard of him stretching wrestler, but it'd be interesting that the one person whose leg that he broke would be Hulk Hogan's. And he never broke Lex Luger's leg, who Lex Luger seemed to be a guy that would have had a worse attitude than Hulk Hogan. But there's no doubt he would have stretched Hogan. He says he invented music in wrestling and was the first guy to use music in the WWE. I think Sergeant Slaughter actually used music in WWE before Hogan when he had the Marine thing playing when he was still a heel. But I mean, Hogan was one of the first to popularize music. He said he brought merch to WWE. That could be true. He turned off all the beer drinkers and cigar smokers from wrestling. How could you say you've turned off the beer drinkers from wrestling? Wrestling fans now probably still drink as much beer as they ever have. You did bring more families to wrestling, that's for sure. So overall, I would give that interview a thumbs up. Logan Paul wants to wrestle more. Hogan did say in this that he wants Logan Paul to get the world title, and he thinks that he should get it this year. The only thing I would say about Logan Paul as a world champion is not the secondary title that nobody considers a world title. That Gunther, who just did a job to Sami Zayn not too long ago. Like, I mean, that belt is like a second. Belt's not even an inter. I think the U.S. title is honestly more over than the second world title. That's just a fact. The U.S. title in September 2024 is more over than the second world title. The title that LA Knight has now. That's just a fact. Dark Side of the Ring, I mean, it's produced by The Rock's company. So you're never going to see them going after anyone under contract too bad. Which, by the way, another thing is Vince McMahon. Another thing I'll disagree with Meltzer in this interview that I posted this week, and I do like Dave Meltzer. He made it seem like people will never forgive Vince McMahon, blah, 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 blah. There's more people now talking positively about Vince McMahon than since this whole thing with Janelle Grant happened. And it seems like it's already blowing over. Logan Paul mentioned in this podcast that he was the last person Vince McMahon personally signed. Hogan put Vince over. We've seen Mark Henry put him over, JBL, Raymond Rougeau. So many people are now going public, and there's not a big backlash when they're putting Vince McMahon over. So I think there's a lot less sympathy for the Grant thing at this point. Hogan versus Rock happened at No Way Out 2003. Vince can confirm when he got those teeth. You see, here's the only thing I find weird about that 10 Harleys. Why wasn't this in his original book? Because that's a pretty cool story that he bought, that he traded one of his old belts in for 10 Harleys. If this was a story he had been telling since the 80s, I mean, that would even have been news at the time. Hey, someone gets an old WWE belt and gives Hulk Hogan himself 10 Harley Davidsons. And what did he do with these Harley Davidsons? I don't know, man. Vince is the Teflon Don. Little Peps, there might be a Harris brother interview in one form or another on this channel, but overall, I was entertained by the interview. So I'm just picking apart some stuff. Oh, the one other thing that he lied about is when he wrestled in Japan. Keep in mind, this was the 70s and 80s when he was wrestling in Japan. Before, because once he started to get big in the 80s, he would only wrestle in the early 90s in Japan for WWE or WWE promoted events. It's not like he was going for New Japan after he became popular in WWE. He said when he went to the ring in Japan, he didn't know if he was going in there with a wrestler or Pride fighter. Pride was not even created until the 90s. So you're telling me in the 70s you're going to the ring for New Japan and you're not sure if you're fighting a wrestler or a guy from Pride that's taken a time machine from 1995 back to the 70s because you couldn't understand their names? Give me a break on that. And the other thing is, he said this, and this is a load of crap, okay? He was an average size guy, a middle sized guy in the 80s. So 6'8", 310 pounds was your average size wrestler in the 80s. Come on. In all reality, you had the Andre the Giants. You had the King Kong Bundy, who I think was 6'4". I met him. I mean, Kamala, I've wrestled him. He's 6'4" or 6'5". There were monsters, and he generally wrestled guys that were bigger than him. But the average size wrestler in the 1980s was not 6'8", 310 pounds. The average would have been Bret Hart's size, probably 5'11", 6 feet, 220 or 230. Hulk Hogan was above average for the 80s. Yes, they're bigger. They were bigger then on average than they are now. That's for sure. He brought up Andre in this Ivan a little bit, but not much. He said Andre taught him how to call matches on the fly. Thanks for sharing that. Humble, even in the worst case, I think Vince owed that woman like $3 million. And he's a multi-billionaire in his 80s. So in the worst case, do I shave my chest? Only when I wrestle. I don't have a lot of hair on myself. Little Pepsi's a giant at 6'1". Remember when Hogan said he would be the next bass player for Metallica? That was denied. He also said at one point him and Vince were going to buy the UFC. Yes, I wrestled Kamala in August of 2007 in Cornwall, Ontario. I wrestled a hell of a lot of Hall of Famers and guys I grew up idolizing. So there you go. There's my review. Thumbs up for the interview. I did make it all the way through. I have to say, as much as I like Logan Paul's podcast, I couldn't make it through the Dominic Mysterio one, his previous one, and I skimmed through the Machine Gun Kelly one. But this was one of his better wrestler interviews for sure. I'd recommend it. But yes, it's full of Hogan typical exaggerations. It did make me want to try his beer though. Hogan, please, if you see this, send me a 6-pack of your beer here to Canada, and I will sample it because